achieving economies of scale through a single contract for transportation in the 5 major schools as opposed to piecemealing it and not accomplishing those economies of scale is something that I think is an excellent idea. So I would encourage the task force as we gather up the results in the next day or so and put them into the form of the report, that we identify those cost saving measures that we have identified along the way, because those plus, frankly, hundreds of others are going to be necessary to put education funding in this state back into a sustainable level. I think this task force has done a very good job talking about and working on issues where we can achieve cost reductions, we can achieve sustainability, and in some instances, regional schools being a good example, in some instances improve the quality of the education that's being delivered to our communities. And certainly the transportation contract being another example, achieve cost savings without detriment to the quality of education that's being delivered to our students. That's what I think the objective of this task force was, the task of this task force was, and I think that we've done a good job identifying those items. But it's going to take implementation. We've talked about them enough. The fiscal crisis that some of us saw being 7 years off when we started this task force because of the oil price drop is now here. As George Allen, the old football coach, used to put it, the future is now. So it's time to start implementing many of those recommendations that we've made and sort of stop the talking and start getting down to it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I agree with Representative Millett. A year-round education. I just think to keep coming back every time there's a crisis isn't necessarily the way to do it, but a lot of the things that we're talking about is policy, and it can be taken care of in that area. I just wanted to point out a couple things on the report that I didn't before. Says the understand, first thing we talked about was a strategic statewide education plan. And to me, that's still our number one issue. I mean, we really can't go forward if we don't know what that road looks like. And I think the definition we had here, our ideas, is very much different than Deed, and it's going to take a little pushing along that way. A collection management and usage system for K through 20, that is currently being done. It's being done through the post-secondary group. It's through federal funds at this point. The question that hasn't been answered is, once the federal funds go away, which they will in about a year, they haven't decided how much it's going to cost yet to sustain that with general funds. So again, we start another project without knowing what they are. And I also still think that the biggest problem kind of comes with the plan is, if we are not making sure that districts are aligned with our standards, they're not going to be able to be successful at the testing. I mean, are we teaching to the test? Absolutely we are. We want our kids to know certain things at each grade level. I mean, I don't think that's, the dispute at this point. But I think a lot of times we hide behind what's local control on it, but we have been sued numerous times on accountability. The state is responsible to make sure that our children are learning at a certain rate and putting in the right intervention if it's not happening. And we can't, and I think if I was Mr. Baker sitting up in the area that he does, I would be very concerned that when we talk about not having the money, that we would be taking it out of the wrong places and actually costing ourselves more money along the way. One thing we didn't discuss, and maybe I can get feedback from you just through the email, is it's been a long time since we talked about, can we sustain schools with 10 children in it? And I've heard different scenarios on, why do you take all the funding away? Maybe you take a percentage away, or maybe you count it as homeschooling and they get that much per student. But I'm not exactly sure how the waiver works, but I know on No Child Left Behind, if I had a one-star school in Fairbanks, then those parents are allowed to pick another school at a better rating than that. Unfortunately, those who made up these rules didn't come to Alaska first. And if you are in a community that you have to get there by other means of transportation, you can be in a poorly functioning school, and parents have little to no resources except getting up, moving out of that area. Could they go to some homeschooling options? Kind of depends upon what area they're in, And so I don't think that was ever meant to have happen, and maybe that's where it needs to be, is that it's not dependent upon whether or not you can get there by road. Maybe that's when the money follows the child. Maybe if that child wanted to go to another school system, that's what it's worth if they're at a 1 or 2 star. But we have to do better at incentivizing good behavior when we really incentivize bad behavior. You're a 4 and 5 star school, state should leave you alone. You obviously got it. You know, most of the 4-star schools are a little bit more because of some of the attendance issues versus the educational. But I think we brought a lot of these things to light. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, that was a good one that Mr. Neese did. We did do something about that when it came to residential schools, of being able to have contracts. But why can't, you know, I know we also decided, you know, or talked a little bit about contracting that school and making somewhat like a charter school and going in that kind of avenue, about opportunity. I want to thank everybody. I have learned a lot. I'm sorry if everybody hasn't felt that same way, and I'd be more than happy to get them the financials. We have most of that money left. I mean, this has been a very frugal group. We've done a lot on, you know, on the phone and on other things. But the communities that we have visited, we've met, not just with the group, but when Representative Gaddis and I have literally walked down the street and talked to anybody who will talk to us. And had community meetings as you kind of dropped in as the plane decided to go a different direction. But we learned a lot that way. But we are in a major change at this point. I'm very concerned that we again decided not to go with a testing organization that's proven. And we're going to make our own test up again, and we're going to somehow figure out what that cut score is. And the only one that gets hurt in all that are the kids. Truly, it's the kids. You know, and I guess I'm a little bit bewildered how we're going to change the standards. I'm not too sure we're changing all the curriculum because, again, we didn't give money for that. Change the testing, and nothing else has changed, and expect a different outcome. We have to address our real issues, and our real issues is it doesn't matter where you come from. We owe you a good education and putting in those resources that you need to be able to have. And I think we've done better with I think our colleagues know more than they did because we've shared our stories and we've done it. So I'm not sorry we did. Could we have done a better job? I think you could always do a better job, you know. But I think as far as bringing a lot of these things to it, I think we could talk about it all day long. You know, I think it's now following through, as Mr. Keithley said, of pushing it forward and making sure that we now make sure that, and I know Representative Millett will do that, we don't need architects deciding how our schools shouldn't be built. We've already seen what happens when that does. We want to see schools built in areas so that more of the money can be put into the students and not into the heating and to all the rest of it. But I wrote down the things that we added. If it'd be okay for those, we'll update the other. I guess I still would like to, Madam Chair, get and I know that was where the robust discussion was, is whether or not it's sustainable or not. But I think we should reinforce that or not reinforce that we're at that, how this committee as a whole feels on that, because that is a strong message that we're going to send back. Can we continue to grow at the rate that we are because we're growing the budget and we're having less students, you know, to go along with that. So with that, again, I really appreciate the hard work. There's been we don't have meetings a lot maybe, but believe me, there's been a lot of emails, a lot of checking. I'm sure Deed has been tired of us for a long time to be able to do that. But now it's implementing and seeing where it goes and giving this to at least to the House Education Committee, and they can forward it to the Senate if they would like. But let's get things done at this point. We've talked it. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Wilson. And that's the great thing about being the last one, so I can say ditto, ditto, ditto along the way. A couple things that I wanted to add were certainly looking at federal mandates that we don't get paid for and what happens if we don't do them. So, you know, this is a great opportunity for Alaska and for education right now for us to really do a pivot and do things, look at efficiencies and look at things, doing things very differently than we may have done before. We really don't have a choice. So I think that we could moan and groan and wring our hands or take this opportunity to say what an opportunity that we have 50 plus years later as a state to really make huge changes looking at the technology that we have that I didn't even dream of 50 years ago. So that being said, I'm looking at opportunities when we talk about business community, and I got to tell you, as a business person, I talk to my other business